If Musk should fail, he would fail for exactly the same reason that Napoleon Bonaparte failed in his invasion of Russia, which is that he had succeeded in everything he had done before. I believe right now, in fact, that Musk is on his march to Moscow. Musk will succeed in getting this program started, no doubt about it. But the question is, will it go all the way?
Hello and welcome back to UnHerd. Our guest today is Robert Zubrin. He's an aerospace engineer and the founder of the Mars Society. His 1996 book, The Case for Mars, was responsible for inspiring one Elon Musk to make taking humans to Mars his calling in life, an ambition that he is edging ever closer, it seems, to achieving. So we thought we'd get him down the line to talk about the race to reach Mars and what exactly life might look like for the Martian generation. Robert Zubrin, welcome to UnHerd.
Thanks for inviting me.
So let's treat myself and our audience as completely uninitiated on this topic, because I think most of us are. Why Mars? What is it about this arid, strange, red planet that seems to fascinate so many people? And what do we know about it at this point in time?
Mars is the key to the human future in space. Mars is where the science is, Mars is where the challenge is, and Mars is where the future is. The early Mars and the early Earth were twins. They were both rocky planets with oceans and carbon dioxide dominated atmospheres. And it was under those conditions that Earth first evolved life. And the question is, did Mars do it as well? And there's a lot of reasons to believe that many planets in their primitive state look like this. And if life evolves naturally in such an environment, it means life is plentiful throughout the universe. We now know from the Kepler Space Telescope that 1 in 5 stars has a Earth-like planet in its habitable zone that is the right distance from its sun to have Earth-like temperatures. So that's like 80 billion stars in the Milky Way galaxy alone. And if life occurs in a matter of course, as it were, in such environments, life's everywhere. And since the whole history of life on Earth is one of development from simpler forms to more complex forms, manifesting greater capacities for activity and intelligence and even ever more rapid evolution. If life's everywhere, it means intelligence is everywhere. It means we're not alone. On the other hand, if we go to Mars and we find that despite the fact that it was really very similar to the early Earth, it did not evolve life, that could mean that the evolution of life from chemistry in these sorts of planets is a matter of freak chance, that the Earth won the lottery, 1 in 1 trillion, and we could be alone in the universe. So it really is the Rosetta Stone for letting us know the truth about the role of life in the universe. A Humans to Mars effort would be a tremendous positive bracing challenge to any country that chose to engage in it, especially to the youth. The spirit of youth is adventure. This would make science the great adventure. You know, when I was a boy, we were doing the Apollo mission, and this was a tremendous inspiration to American youth at that time. And in fact, as a result of Apollo, America doubled the number of science graduates that it had in every field, and in some fields tripled it. And today it would have a much larger effect because the science and engineering professions are opened, for instance, to women in a way that was just not the case in the 1960s. I believe that Mars can be settled because all the materials that are needed to support life and technological civilization exist there. You just need to develop the technologies that turn those materials into resources. I do not believe this will happen in the way that Elon Musk projects, that we're just going to land 1 million people on Mars and have a city there. I think it's going to happen much more organically, and we can talk about that. But I think that eventually this can happen, and this means that we will plant the seeds of new branches of human civilization in a challenging environment that will force them to be extremely inventive and make many contributions to the human future.
Let's start with the American situation. Of course, you mentioned that Apollo, which was one of the early forms of this pioneering American spirit in space travel. We've got two groups working in America right now, primarily on this question, which is SpaceX, of whom the CEO is, of course, Elon Musk. And then on the other side, NASA, who are what you call in your piece for UnHerd, the kind of establishment of space travel. Can you just explain the two different approaches that those groups are taking and how they might differ in their results?
NASA, of course, is our space agency, and it's done amazing things over the years. It sent astronauts to the moon. It sent rovers to Mars. It sent Voyager to Neptune and beyond. They've accomplished amazing things. But NASA actually has two different modes of operation. One is when it is purpose driven and it can do these incredible things. But the other is it is a government agency with a lot of money to spend. And sometimes what it does is it seeks to spend that money in ways to get support for itself. In its purpose driven mode, it spends money to do things. In its vendor driven modes, it does things in order to spend money. And if you look at NASA and its various programs, you can see they're quite distinct in terms of when they're purpose driven and when they're vendor driven. Apollo was purpose driven. The purpose was not scientific, it was geostrategic, but it was to astonish the world with what free people could do, and it did. And of course, Hubble is science driven, Webb is science driven, the Mars rovers are science driven. But Artemis, the current NASA effort to send people back to the moon, which was initiated under the first Trump administration and continued under Biden, is clearly vendor driven. It is not being directed with any sense of purpose. They have 5 different flight systems that do not fit together. They're basically random programs that are being funded because there are various constituencies that want money.
So there's kind of interest groups within NASA who are using these different projects to gain funding for their particular area of research.
There's both technological R&D groups within NASA, but there's also major vendors, Lockheed Martin, Boeing, Blue Origin, etc. And I mean, SpaceX also likes, everybody likes money. I mean, the question is whether you're directing that money in a way that will produce a real product, or whether you're just looking to get people to like you by spending money where they are. And of course, Congress gets into this because they want the money going to their district. So this is the problem. And you have to have sufficient strong-willed NASA leadership that is willing to tell people, okay, we're giving out contracts, but this is what it is for. When you run a company, you may have vendors, but you don't run your company in order to give money to vendors. You give money to vendors in order to provide a service that you actually need. So Artemis is an example of NASA at its worst. Some people have said, well, look, NASA is just a total mess. Why don't we give the Mars program to SpaceX? Just farm it out. Let Musk do it, because SpaceX has an excellent engineering organization. But I think that this would be absolutely wrong, and I think it would doom the program because the conflict of interest would be so apparent with Musk running the government and taking money from the government into his company and so forth. And given that he has defined himself in such an extreme partisan fashion, 3 years ago, Musk was a white knight. He was going to solve global warming with his electric cars, and liberals loved him for that. And the conservatives loved him for the rockets, and everybody loved him. But now he is very clearly on one side of the fence, almost violently so. And so that if this program is about Elon Musk, it will be canceled as soon as the political fortunes of war shift.
Currently, what is the program that SpaceX is following? If you think about the last few years of their work, prior to Musk becoming this kind of right-hand man to Trump, what were they doing? And was that particularly different from NASA? Was that on the same trajectory?
Musk, okay, was far more aggressive and risk tolerant than NASA. Musk was following a philosophy that NASA had in the early years of the space program, which is launch, fly, crash, figure out what went wrong, fly another one, get progressively through the launch plan, solving one problem after another. In the more recent period, I mean, look, NASA, the Space Launch System, the SLS Heavy Lift Booster, I was actually a member of the team that did the preliminary design for that rocket when I was at Lockheed Martin or Martin Marietta, as it was then called, in 1988. We did the preliminary design for that rocket, which flew for the first time in 2023. Okay, that's 35 years. You compare that to the Saturn V, where they cut the contract in 1962 and flew it in 1967, 5 years. Okay, from program start to first. So they used to be far more daring. Musk has come back with that kind of spirit. Now, so you see a lot of SpaceX failures on their flights. They fail plenty of times, but they just keep coming and eventually succeed, and succeed much quicker despite the failures, or in fact really because of the failures, than NASA is willing to do. That's the positive side. of Musk. Okay, the negative side is that he has let success come to his head, and at this point, he's power drunk, and you can't talk to him.
Have you tried to speak to him during this time? I mean, he was obviously greatly affected by your book. Have you tried to reach out to him?
I've tried, but you see, in 2001, Elon Musk was just this kid who had done well with a website and made money on PayPal. Okay. So yeah, I mean, was worth $180 million, which is a lot more than, me or anyone else who was trying to talk to him. But he was a person. You could go out to dinner with him, talk with him. You could argue with him. He'd consider your arguments. As he has risen in stature over the years and become not just a successful businessman, but a incredibly successful businessman who introduced reusable rockets, which no one had ever done before, and now a world leader, he's become less and less approachable, and he's not willing to listen to people. And he's also, frankly, and it has to be said, been less concerned with what he's saying is true or not.
Do you think, in some strange way, though, that egotism, that lack of care for the truth, might actually mean that he is the first person to put a man on Mars? That in some way, that accelerationism and pioneer spirit and lack of worry is actually what's going to propel him into space?
I was interviewed by Time magazine for their Man of the Year issue in 2021 when they made Musk the Man of the Year. And they asked me all sorts of things about him. And in terms of the prowess and his engineering skills and of himself and his team, because of course it's not just him, his real skill is choosing his team, is tremendous. But then they ask me, if he fails, why will he fail? Okay. And I said, if Musk should fail, he would fail for exactly the same reason that Napoleon Bonaparte failed in his invasion of Russia, which is that he had succeeded in everything he had done before. Okay. There are all these French generals that told Napoleon, why don't we just take Poland and call it good? And he said, no, you people always advocated caution before. You were always wrong. I was always right. We're going to Moscow. And I believe right now, in fact, that Musk is on his march to Moscow. There are some things that he's doing that are not going to work. He's making a lot of enemies. I believe Musk will succeed in getting this program started, no doubt about it. He's a powerhouse. But the question is, will it go all the way?
Trump said that he would plant a flag on Mars during his presidency. I would
Yeah,
love to
well,
hear what
ain't
you
going
think
to
of that.
happen during Trump's presidency. It's simply not true. Okay, Musk is talking about landing a Starship on Mars in 2026. That's a year from now. That's not happening. Okay, he might land a Starship on Mars unmanned in 2029, launched in 2028 while Trump is still president. But in terms of doing a manned mission to Mars, that's not happening until around 2033, 8 years from now.
Can you just unpack that a bit for us? What are the challenges facing a manned mission to Mars? Why is that so different to sending up a satellite or sending up anything else?
Well, first of all, a human mission involves much larger payloads than launching satellites. And furthermore, we're not just launching heavy payloads, we're landing heavy payloads on Mars. Now, the Starship could do that in principle. What his mission plan involves is not just getting a Starship to orbit, okay, but refueling it on orbit with additional tanker starships. If the Starship can really get to orbit with 100 tons of cargo, okay, and it only weighs 100 tons itself, then four tankers, each with 100 tons of propellant, could refuel it with enough fuel for it to fly from Earth orbit to Mars and land one way on Mars. That could be done. But first of all, that means getting to orbit not with 50 tons, but 100 tons. Because if you needed 50 tons, then you would need eight tankers to do it. Okay, and so forth. So then the requirements go up. And you also have to do the orbital refueling. And the propellants that the Starship uses are cryogenic, liquid oxygen and liquid methane. No one has ever done a zero gravity transfer of cryogenic propellants. All the liquid propellant transfers that have been done on orbit have been propellants that are normal temperature things like, kerosene or water or something, in which you can use rubber bladders to transfer things, but that won't work with ultra cold things. So this is a new technology, zero G transfer of cryogens. He has to do it. He has to develop not just the tanker, but the Starship. He's got to develop the refueling, and then he also has to develop the Mars reentry and landing thing. This is not happening in 2 years. It would be extremely challenging to do it in 4 years. And then the return trip involves making the return propellant on Mars out of carbon dioxide and water, which is doable. I've done it in the lab. But to do it on the scale required for Starship is an entirely different proposition. There's an awful lot of work to be done.
If it isn't reasonable for Trump to say that he can plant a flag on Mars in his 4-year term, what would be a reasonable timeline for reaching Mars with a human voyage?
What I would do, okay, is first of all, I would target an unmanned landing on Mars to be launched in 2028, which would be during Trump's turn, although that could slip to 2031 if this would be ambitious, but it is possible, okay? To try to do that, to set that as the goal. And then that mission would land on Mars a robotic expedition. That is, if you could really land, okay, Musk says he could land 100 tons on Mars. Let's get, say, 30 tons. Okay, let's say that's the reality. That's still really good because right now all we could do is land 1 ton. Okay, you land 30 tons. So instead of landing one Curiosity sized rover, you land 15. And then you also land 15 helicopters, and not little ones like the Ingenuity helicopter, but big ones that can carry instruments and fly out and grab samples and bring them back to the landing site, where you would have the Starship fitted out with a whole laboratory of analytic instruments. So the rovers and the helicopters are bringing samples back and it's all being analyzed. In order to have a mission with a terrific scientific punch. And about 100 times more science would get done on this mission than on a typical, JPL Mars mission like the Curiosity mission that we have done up till now. Okay, so now you get the science community on board. Okay, and not with public relations, but real accomplishment. And the science community tilts left. So now you make this a bipartisan thing. People can see merit in the program, and therefore it has a chance of continuing beyond Trump because it's just not about some crazy thing that Trump wants to do to plant a flag or Musk wants to do to have 1 million people on Mars who will survive there after the Earth is destroyed or something like that, which is just a crazy motivation. But here it is. We're going to use this ability to deliver first heavy unmanned payloads and then human explorers to Mars to radically improve the kind of science we can do on Mars. And that is something that people can understand. That is something that people could support. And then, yes, 8 years from now, we could land people. It would be hard to do. This is not easy. This is an optimistic thing, but it is not an impossible fraudulent claim, which is what the 2028 stuff is.
If you can humour me just on the kind of forward projection here, if we do have this successful Mars mission that's a mechanical one and then a human one that follows, the research is done, the science is successful, the scientific community comes together, agrees that this is a kind of good plan for the future of humanity, that perhaps there will be enriching minerals or potential breakthroughs that will happen on Mars. Then beyond that, this idea of a kind of Martian colony. Can you just kind of explain to me in your mind, knowing as you do this kind of landscape of Mars so well, what could that possibly look like? Are people living in craters? Are there cities? How does the terrain work? How can humans even live any sort of day-to-day life in the atmosphere on Mars? Just kind of walk me through that, what that might look like.
Okay, what Musk has done or is on very near to succeed in is introducing fully reusable heavy lift launch vehicles. This is big. Now, if there's reusable launch vehicles, in the not too distant future, there's going to be something else that has never existed in the world, which is used launch vehicles. Okay? There are only used cars because cars are reusable. If cars were expendable, there'd be no such thing as a used car. Okay? So there's going to be used launch vehicles. And not just from SpaceX, because there's like 5 companies in China right now that are working on copies of the Falcon 9, Musk's current workhorse. And if Starship is successful, there's going to be 5 companies in China working on copies of Starship, as well as companies in the free world. Okay, so this is not going to be just about Musk. This is going to be about this technology is going to be in play. It's going to be part of reality. And just like you can get a used car for one tenth the cost of a comparable new car, you're going to be able to get a used Starship or a Starship copycat for one tenth the cost of a new one. And Musk told me that he could actually build the Starship upper stage, which is the part that would go to Mars, for $10 million, which means that either he or one of his copycats would probably be willing to sell them for 20. And that means that at some point they'll become available used for two. Okay, now Musk claims that one of these things could transport 100 people one way to Mars. $2 million divided by 100 people is $20,000 a person. So that is the kind of money that if someone actually wanted to move to Mars, they could find it. And so you will have the reality of 20 years from now will be that it'll be possible for groups of people who want to try colonizing Mars to try to do it, whether because they're part of a religious group that is persecuted or for whatever reason, whatever their ideals are, they will have a chance to try. So people ask me, what will the government be on Mars? Well, that's for them to decide. And there'll probably be a lot of different kinds of governments tried on Mars, and the best one will be the one that prevails. Okay, it will be the only ones that succeed, and if more than one succeeds, the best one will be the one that tends to attract the most immigrants because it leads to the best way of life. Now, in terms of the technology, I think that Mars cities, or initially villages and then cities, that most of the living quarters will be underground, but there'll be an above ground section. The reason why most of the living quarters will be below ground is to shield from radiation. The radiation levels on the surface of Mars are about the same as those at the International Space Station. So it's not like you're in a radiation field that, oh my God, here I am, I'm about to die. No, it's a question of cumulative dose. And if you can cut that, let's say you spend 80% of your time underground. I mean, I have never calculated it, but I would imagine that I spend at least 80% of my time indoors. Okay, most people do. So that's the underground time. And then you have a dome in which you have a breathable atmosphere, and there you've got gardens and parks and whatever, and public space, and you can go there when you want to be outside. And since the time when you're underground, you get no radiation, you're reducing the radiation dose by a factor of 5, which basically means that it's not a consideration in terms of having any significant health effect. I believe Martian cities will be nuclear powered and ultimately fusion powered. Fusion power is the most advantageous form of power to use on Mars because deuterium, which is the fuel for fusion reactors, is 5 times as common on Mars as it is on Earth. A Martian life support system, all space life support systems at one stage in the process involves the electrolysis of water, which liberates hydrogen from oxygen. And when the hydrogen is liberated from the oxygen, it's relatively easy to separate the deuterium, which is heavy hydrogen, from the normal hydrogen. So basically, processing deuterium on Mars will happen as a matter of course and on a rather large scale. I think that the Martians are going to want to be driven to develop fusion power for their own purposes, but this will be of tremendous benefit to the Earth as well. Martian agriculture is going to be greenhouse agriculture, sharply limited in acreage, and so the Martians are going to want to be pushing real hard on ultra productive crop technologies. Once again, these sorts of biotechnologies that they will be ardent innovators in will be of tremendous benefit to the earth. Okay, and what could go on? So you have a frontier environment where there are important challenges in a number of key areas. You develop them and you benefit not just yourself, but you benefit humanity as a whole. America is one model for that. You know, you British invented the steam engine. Americans invented the steamboat because in early America, the only serious highways there were the rivers. Sailboats don't do that well on rivers. So we figured we got to take steam and put it to work propelling boats. And that required taking steam engines and making them much more efficient. Because if you're just using a steam engine to pump water out of coal mines, you have an infinite supply of coal right there. It's not a problem. But if you want to put it on a boat, okay, you got to take your fuel with you. Okay, and furthermore, the engine has to be more compact, and so you get to more efficient high pressure steam engines which then enable railroads, which become the transformative invention of the 19th century. So frontier societies can be tremendously valuable, not just for themselves, but what they are forced to create.
But there has never been an interplanetary colony, as far as we know. And so this is a kind of uncharted territory in terms of, as you say, governance and democracy. What's not to say that the Americans or the Chinese or the Russians, should there be some sort of new space race, arrive on Mars and claim it as their own and enforce their style of governance on the planet? What is to stop them doing that?
Well, first of all, Mars is a pretty big place, so there's room on Mars for more than one flag. Okay, put it that way. I think there will be diverse groups of people going to Mars, and they will go there with diverse ideals. But the ones that ultimately prevail on Mars will be the ones that attract the most immigrants. You would be speaking English regardless of what happened in the 18th century. But the reason why I speak English is, well, because America became an English speaking place. And the reason why America became English speaking and not French speaking was because the British colonies were established as true communities with churches and schools and all this sort of thing. So British women were willing to emigrate to North America. The French colonies were established as militarized beaver trading posts. And so French women were not willing to go to New France. And as a result, when it came down to the final conflict in the 1750s, there were 2 million English speaking people in North America and 50,000 French. So similarly, Mars. You take the United States itself later on. We had the North, we had the South. Okay, you ask any American Civil War buff, why did the North win the Civil War? They would say, well, the North had a vastly larger population and more industry. Well, that's true. But why did it have a vastly larger population and more industry? Because it was free. Because that's where all the immigrants went. The immigrants in very large majority went to the northern states, which we had free labor, not to the southern states, which was slavery. And so the North prevailed. And similarly, it will be the case on Mars. If you The science fiction dystopia of the extraterrestrial tyranny is possible, but such colonies would die on the vine because no one would emigrate there. Okay, it's only the societies that offer the highest quality of life, which includes human freedom, as well as things like aesthetics and so forth. That's going to be the ones that attract the most immigrants.
One final word on Elon Musk and SpaceX then before I let you go. What do you think the correct path would be here for Musk? I mean, of course, you've been very vocal about how you think he's gone on the wrong route by making allegiances with Trump. But other than his political career, do you think there's something he could do in terms of space travel and the innovations on that side that would make the biggest difference in this moment in time?
He did manage to get chosen for NASA administrator, a very promising candidate, Jared Isaacson. We'll have to see how he works out, but on the surface, he certainly looks quite qualified. Musk has to make himself Isaacson's conduit to Trump as opposed to Trump's conduit to Isaacson. Okay, if you're running NASA and you can have the ear of the president, that is certainly an advantage to the program. Okay, on the other hand, if you're being dominated by someone who's making arbitrary decisions and makes it impossible to do what you need to do. Now, furthermore, Musk has got to open his minds to some things because the correct technical architecture for the Mars program is not Starship does everything. We need Starship plus something kind of like Starship, but much smaller. I call it Starboat. Okay, because you see, while Starship is very promising as a way to send things to Mars, it's very suboptimal for coming back because it's so big, it's so heavy. It takes 600 tons of propellant that you'd have to make on Mars to send a Starship from Mars back to Earth. If you just park the Starship in Mars orbit and use a star boat to go up and down from the Starship, you'd only need 50 tons of propellant to make on the Martian surface. And similarly, that same combination could do the moon as well. Starship in lunar orbit, starboat going up and down, using an orbital starship as a tanker that can refuel it. Okay, that's the way to go. Now, I've tried to explain this to Musk, and he can point out, well, but if I fuel Starship enough, and if I make enough fuel on Mars, and if I do enough launches, I can do everything with Starship. He wants it to be one size fits all. I'm saying the right arc plan here is two sizes fits all. And now that's fine if SpaceX doesn't want to be the one who does the starboat. NASA could take, for instance, the contract it gave to the national team, which is Lockheed Martin and Blue Origin, which they funded to build an incompatible lunar lander alongside Starship, and say, instead of doing that thing, we want you to make Starboat. You can have your money, but build what we need. And then you would have the Starship plus Starboat, and we'd be able to do both the moon and Mars quite efficiently.
Okay, Robert, one very final question for you. If you were offered the opportunity, would you go to Mars?
In a few more years, I would. Okay, I got a few more things I got to get done here, but then yes, I'd like to do that because you only live once, and to be part of something that historic, yeah, sure, I would do it.
In the meantime, it's been great to have your insights. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for inviting me once again.
So that was Robert Zubrin, aerospace engineer, founder of the Mars Society and author of The Case for Mars, and more recently, The New World on Mars, his vision for a future Martian life for generations to come. A truly informative half hour there with Robert getting into the nitty-gritty of what it might mean to be the Martian generation. Not something I'm particularly keen on the idea of, but he seemed ready to take up the challenge should it come calling. Thanks for watching. This was UnHerd.